Chuck.
Well, thanks for coming. I hope I don't disappoint you with this being too basic, just how to use this nice, inexpensive calculator that the math department stocks. And so, those that don't know me, I'm Professor Chuck Newberg, and I'm one of the old math professors here on campus. So, all right. So, a little introduction of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through the mode button and understand a little bit of some of the features in the mode settings of this calculator. And I know some students panic when the mode gets set differently. Then we're going to talk about powers and roots, how to do the powers and roots on this calculator. And then we'll talk about fractions and decimals, how to convert back and forth, take advantage of the fraction buttons and the decimal buttons on your calculator. And then we'll always talk a little bit about the exact value versus the approximate value, how to get that approximate value when the calculator is giving you the exact value. And then from there, we'll look at a couple of complicated examples that my students had to put into this calculator last semester in problem solving for finances. And I'll show you a little bit of features, how to do complicated expressions. So, okay. So let's talk about the mode button. So I've hit the mode button. If you want to go ahead and hit the mode button on your calculator, it's up there by the green button. And you see you have 4 different lines there, and we'll just take each line individually. The first one is degree, rad, and grad. All right. And this is the button, this is the area that freaks students out because they don't know what degree, rad, and gradient is. And if you're not taking trigonometry, you can ignore this setting altogether. If you're taking trigonometry, you'll understand what this setting does. So you don't have to worry about if your calculator is set on degrees, you're going to get the right answer. If your calculator is set on radians, you're going to get the right answer. And if your calculator is set on gradients, you're also going to get the right answer. So unless you're doing trigonometry, you don't have to panic about that. So if your 5-year-old gets a hold of your calculator and messes with the buttons, and now you're seeing that you got grad there and you're wondering what the heck grad does, well, unless you're doing trigonometry functions, you don't need to worry about it. So, and that's all I have to say about those. When you get into trig, you'll understand those buttons much better, so those settings. All right, then the next thing is norm, science, engineering row, next row down. One is norm is for normal setting, science is scientific setting, and engineering is engineering setting. So let's look at the difference between those 3. Normal, if you just enter in a number, it just leaves it as is. So here I've entered in the number 452,467, and notice it just, the calculator left it alone. If I switch to scientific mode and enter in that same button, and how would I switch to scientific mode? I'd have to use the little arrow buttons. I'd arrow down to scientific mode and hit enter, and it'd blacken it. And if I switch to scientific mode and enter that same number, what's the calculator going to do? It's going to put it in scientific mode. And remember, scientific mode is the first number is between what, 1 and 10, and then we have what, our powers of 10. It moved the decimal point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places, and left that as 4.5 times what, 10 to the 5th power. And so that's that mode. So if you're doing a lot of scientific calculations, you might leave it in scientific mode. Or if you are working on science, well, you leave it in that mode. All right, and then engineering mode is like scientific mode, but the engineers, they like powers of 3, multiples of 3. And that way they can tell how big it is. A 10 cube's 1,000, right? So the engineer can look at this and say that's 452,000, just that quick, versus that, yep, talks, you can see the magnitude that way. That's why the engineers like it. They can see the magnitude. So, but I never worked in engineering mode before. Until I gave this talk a couple of years ago, I didn't even know what engineering mode was. I had to look it up. So, all right. So that's the difference between those modes. Then the next line down in the mode button is float, and then you have all these numbers from 0 to 9.
Well, float means it just floats the decimal point. Wherever the decimal point ends at, it'll have that many place values. If you go to like put it at 3, it's going to fix to 3 decimal place values. And I'll show you the difference between those two. So first I did a calculation. I did 5.05 times 2.0012, and I came up with this 10 point blah, blah, blah. And notice it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 place values. And that's in float mode. And why did we get 5 place values? Because we got 2 times 4, and that would give us 6 place values, but 2 times 5, and the last digit is a 0, so it didn't put the 0 out there. But now let's look at that if I would have fixed this. And let's say I fixed it to 3 decimal place values. So here, this is in float mode. I got my, oh, nope, now I got it fixed. I've toggled down, I've arrowed over to the 3, and I've fixed it at what? 3 decimal place values. And so if I hit enter now, it will take this decimal, and instead of giving us 5 digits place values, it only gives us what? 3 place values. And notice the 4th place value is a 0, so we would what? Chop off. It still uses standard rounding conventions. If we fix this to 2 place values, do that next. Here I fixed it to 2 place values, and you always tell when it's fixed, it has a little FIX up here, so it's fixed. And you see I got what, 2 place values? Well, if you look at the last answer, it was 0.106. Now we come up with 0.11. Why 0.11? Because it looked at the 3rd place value, it was 5 or above, and it what, rounded up. So that's nice thing about the fix thing. I like my students to fix their calculator when we're doing like finance stuff, so we're looking at the nearest penny, and I'm not getting answers out to like 10 million place values. So, all right. So the fix feature works really well when you're dealing with finance, or you want just not to look at so many place values. All right, then classic versus math print. First off, math print. Hopefully your calculator is set in math print where it's highlighted black there. And what does math print do? Well, math print was like the best invention in the calculator. It makes your math on your screen look like the math on the paper. Notice the 2/3 looks like a fraction, and the exponent looks like an exponent, and we come up with what, 26/3. In classic, let's look at classic right now. The same calculation, so now I've switched to the classic mode. In classic mode, these are the same keystrokes, but notice this doesn't look like what it would look like on the paper. I don't even know why they have classic mode still in the calculator, because you have to really be already skilled at reading mathematics to read classic mode math. So I suspect that one's going to get dropped out in future calculators. All right, let's talk about powers and roots now. And I honed in on the left-hand bottom side of the screen there. And this first button here, so first off, you have the first level, and then you have what, the second level on each one of these buttons. And this here is the Xth root. So this will do any root. If you want to do the 5th root, the 7th root, the 9th root, this will do any root. This arrow up button is caret button. That's our power button. This is our square root button, and this is what, our square button. We do square roots and squares so much they actually built them into a button, although you could have done them with what, these 2 buttons as well. So let's look at doing a calculation, just a basic calculation. So we got the root button, which is the X, the square root symbol. We got the power button, which is the caret key. Then we got the square root button, which we all recognize there, and then we got the square button. So those are our powers and roots. So let's do the cube root of 8. And how would I do the cube root of 8 on this calculator? First thing I have to do is tell the calculator what root I'm doing. So the first thing I have to do is enter in a 3. And then the root button was on the second level, so I had to hit the second button, which is up on the upper left-hand corner. And then I had to hit the root button. and then the 8. So that told the calculator we're doing the cube root of 8. Notice how pretty it looks there, that math print. And the cube root of 8 is 2. So I'll pause a second here and let you try the cube root of 8 on your calculator so you understand the root button. So, and it was important my students could do other roots in the finance class because we had to find interest rates and we had to take the root. I don't remember what root it was, like the 20th root or something like that. And we had to be able to take roots. So they will pop up in the finance stuff. Then the next one is the power button. So let's look at doing 2 to the 5th. And how would I do 2 to the 5th on my calculator? First off, I'd enter in the 2, and then I would use the power button. It's on the first level, so I didn't have to hit the second, and then the 5, and then the enter. And you can see it looks like an exponent, and the answer is what? 32. So I give you a moment to try to get that on your calculator. All right, so good. So it looks like we're getting those. So, all right. Then let's talk about the square root of 12. Another calculation we'd like to do. And so first off, I had to, how did I get to the square root? First, I have to enter the square root first. The square root comes first, and then the 12 comes second. So I had to use the second and then the square root button, and then enter in the 12 and hit enter. I'll let you try that calculation, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then I want you to notice, what did it do for us? It what? Reduced our radical for us. This calculator has the ability to reduce some radicals. Why did it make it 2 square root of 3? Well, 12 is what? 4 times 3, and the square root of 4 is what? 2, and the square root of 3 is the square root of 3. So these will produce an exact, it'll reduce down. Now, it only reduces down if they're small radicals. It won't reduce down a monster radical. It doesn't have that much power in the calculator. All right. Next, let's look at minus 4 squared. So notice I used some parentheses. And when you want to square a negative, you must what? Remember to what? Use your parentheses. Now remember, your calculator doesn't have a brain. That's a few models out. I'm sure AI will eventually have a calculator with a brain. I'll be retired. I won't be able to give a talk on it. But you got it. Your calculator doesn't have a brain, so it doesn't know if you're squaring negative 4 or 4. And so you need to use parentheses to get what? 16 there. You use the left parenthesis, the negative button, not the subtraction button. The negative button's down at the bottom there by the 0. And then we have the 4, and then the right parenthesis, and then I hit the square button, and it came up with what? I hit the enter, and it came up with what? 16. So if you need to square a negative 16, you must use parentheses. If you don't use parentheses, your calculator is going to see that as the opposite of 4 squared, and it's going to see it as what? Negative 16. And so this messed up some of my students this semester in college algebra because they were using the Pythagorean theorem and they weren't squaring their negatives, or the distance formula. They weren't squaring their negatives correctly. All right, fractions and decimals. Hone in on this part of the calculator. So first off, the n over d, that's what? Numerator over denominator. That is our key fraction button. It's like one of my favorite buttons on this calculator. Then the next level up, un over d, that's what? Our mixed number. And then this button here converts from an improper fraction to a mixed number. And then this last one converts fractions to what? Decimals. So those key features there. So let's look at a couple of calculations there. So we got our fraction, we got our mixed number, We got our convert fraction to mixed number and vice versa. That goes both ways. And we got our convert to decimals and fraction buttons. All right, so let's do a simple calculation, 2/3 plus 4/5. 2/3 plus 4/5. And so how I enter my fractions, some students like to hit the fraction button first, but it's actually easier if you hit your numerator first and then your fraction button and then your denominator. And then you have to get out of the denominator with an arrow button and then plus for what? Plus the 4/5, and then I did the same thing there. So I'll give you a minute to try to add those two fractions on the calculator for me. And did we all come up with 22/15? So, which is what, an improper fraction? We could take that to a proper fraction, or a mixed number here in a second. All right, so let's do a dreaded math problem here that most of us probably have horror stories about. What do we got here? A mixed number divided by what? A whole number. All right, unless you're teaching like middle school math or K through 6 math, most of us don't need to know the algorithms to do that. We need to get the calculation done. So how would I do this one on my calculator? First thing is, I got to go to the mixed number. So I went ahead and I hit second and then the mixed number button. So find second and the mixed number. And then I entered in the 3, and then I had to toggle around because that mixed number gives you what? A spot for the whole, a spot for the numerator, and a spot for what? The denominator. And then I had what? Divide by 6. So see if you can get 3 2/3 divided by 6 to be 11/18 on your calculator. What's that?
So when you say toggle around.
Yep, this is your
So I
toggle
hit-
button. So enter in a 3
right?
and then toggle.
Well, not toggle.
That's the toggle button. So when I say toggle, let me go backwards here. When I say toggle, I'm talking about, and I should have pointed this out, I apologize for that. When I say toggle, I'm using these arrows to toggle around positions. So these arrows here will move us around. So, all right. Okay, now let's do 5 times 3/4. And first thing I would do is hit 5 and then what? The times button, and then do the 3 and then what? The fraction. So 5 times 3/4. So I go ahead and get 15/4 there. Which is what? An improper fraction. And most of us, 15/4 doesn't mean a lot to us. It actually means more to us if we think about it as what? A mixed number. So now we're going to convert this to a mixed number. And how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to go and use the second, and then that button that said what? The fraction, and then little, let me scroll back here. I'll show you which button. Oops. You're going to use this button here on the second level to what? Convert a improper fraction to what? A mixed number. And you should come up with what? 3 and what? 3/4. So see if you can get 3 3/4 on your calculator for me. And I don't know about you, but 3 3/4 means more to me than 15/4. I can see it. I can visualize 3 3/4. 15/4 is just an abstract, improper fraction to me. All right. So Now, the other thing this calculator will do is convert decimals to fractions, fractions to decimals. Sometimes we have these calculations we need to do. And so one thing we can do is we have that, and we saw that button, that fraction to decimal button that we just saw right next to the mixed number to a improper fraction button. So go ahead and enter in 0.34 and then find the fraction to the decimal button. It's on the second level, and it's with the table button. So if you find the table button, it's on the second level. And notice it not only did it convert it to a fraction, but it converted it to what, a reduced fraction for us, which is kind of nice. So, and a little bit of my students' homework was just to convert a percentage to a fraction, and some of them took decimals to fractions, and some took advantage of this calculator. All right, another way to convert a decimal to a fraction is this little double white arrow. It's a magic little button. So this little double white arrow, go ahead and enter in 0.034 and hit that double white arrow. And what happened? It turned it to what? A fraction as what? Well, I never use the fraction of the decimal button. I always use this double white arrow button. They should give it a name. I don't know if it has it. Do you know if it has a name? I call it the magic button. So, all right. So you can convert fractions to decimals, decimals to fractions pretty easily on this calculator. All right. Now let's go back to the square root of 12. The square root of 12 came out to be 2 square root of 3. And sometimes you need a decimal approximation to that. Well, that little double white arrow again, that little magic button will convert it to a decimal form, an approximate form. If you hit it again, it will convert it back to its exact form. So this will toggle between decimal form and exact form on the calculator, which is kind of nice. So sometimes you need that approximation, and the calculator doesn't give you the approximation. It gives you the exact value to start with. So, all right. Now, I know it's a little small back there, but now let's talk about a complicated example. Here's a finance formula that we had to put in last semester in my problem-solving class. And it is, I'm trying to remember what this problem is. I believe it's to pay off a $152,810 loan. What would be your monthly payment? And so if I was going to enter this in, first off, my calculator doesn't have a brain. We have the brain, so we got to think about it for a second. First thing I do is I see I got a big fraction. So the first thing I do now is hit the fraction button. So go ahead and hit the fraction button. And then I'm up in the numerator. I just start typing this in, 152810, left parenthesis, and just type it in just as it looks. So just type in the numerator just as it looks there. I'll give you a minute to try that.
Do you have to be in the math print mode to get this to work?
It would help to be in the math print mode, because otherwise you're going to need parentheses. So enter in just the numerator, and then after you've entered in the numerator, toggle down to the denominator and enter in that bottom expression. And then after that, and just work your way from left to right. These calculators can handle this complicated calculation. Just work your way from left to right, and I'm going to give you the final answer in case you want to try it. The final answer is $938.39. That would be the monthly house payment.
If you type something wrong, if you just hit the delete button, it takes out just the last thing you put. You don't have to start over.
And I haven't talked about insert and delete. I need to probably add that in.
Woohoo! Yeah, ladies.
So if you just painstakingly just go keystroke by keystroke, you can get a pretty good consistent calculator work off this calculator and come up with 938. All right, now some of us might be struggling because we got such a complicated thing here. We're going to redo this calculation again, except this time we're going to take advantage of another feature of our calculator. All right, so we're going to take advantage of these two buttons here. We got the stow button, which allows us to stow calculations. And then we got the variable buttons, which is X, Y, Z, T, A, B, and C. If you just keep hitting it, it'll change which variable you're going to use. We're going to use X. So the first thing we're going to do on this one is we're going to do the denominator, because that's a complicated expression. So all I did was I did the denominator. I did the downstairs here. So go ahead and enter in the denominator there. I'll give you a minute to enter in the denominator. You should come up with 2.94 and so forth. And then after you do that, you're going to go ahead and hit the stow button, and then you're going to hit the X. So after you do that, and it's way at the end here, you're going to hit the stow button. I know it's a little small there. You're going to hit the stow button and then the X, and then hit enter. And that's going to store it as X. So our denominator now is what? X. What are we going to do now? We're going to go and figure out what our numerator is. So let's go and figure out what our numerator is. And so let's do our numerator. I'll give you a minute to calculate out the numerator. Just work your way from left to right using left parentheses, right parentheses. Just work your way across. And hit enter. And then don't do anything else to the calculator. So this is our last number in our calculator. It's our numerator, and we stored this as what? X. So now what do we want to do with this number? We want to what? Divide it by what? X. So all we're going to do now is hit divide. All we're going to do is hit divide. And then we're going to hit the X button, and it's going to hit what? Recall. Let me make sure. And you should get to where you can divide by X, and you get answer divided by that number, and you come up with 938. Did we get 938? So sometimes when I have a really complicated calculation, I will stow it as a variable. Or maybe I'll stow a constant as a variable that I'm going to use a lot, like gravity or something like that. And so, all right, we got one more calculation. I'm going to let you try this one. And this is also a finance problem. This is how much money you have to deposit into an annuity at 6% for 30 years. What's your monthly annuity deposit? So I'll let you try this calculation. I'll give you about a minute to try it because we got about a minute left. Sorry, I should have made the font a little bigger. And see, and I'll give you the answer now. The answer is $995.51, which was also a finance problem for my problem. So these last three problems were all from my Math 1000 class. How many? 18? All right. Everybody get that on the calculator? Hopefully you did. So, and that is, so that's some of the more advanced calculations you can do with this little calculator. It's a great little calculator. It's not the perfect calculator, but it's, for the price, it's definitely a good calculator. So, all right. So we got a prize to give away, I think.